After months of testimony in the Ada County Courthouse, Chad Daybell found guilty on all 8 charges against him. These were charges of murder in the death of Tammy Daybell, Tylee Ryan, and J.J. Vallow. Also found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and guilty of insurance fraud. We were able to sit down with jurors this week and talk to them about their experience. We sat down with 6 of the people who sat in that jury box every single day, listening to hour after hour of testimony. And they talked about the emotional toll that it took on them to be there, to hear and see the evidence. They talked about that. It said that it was like watching a show together. Because of the rules that jurors must follow, they weren't able to have conversations in the jury room. So in between testimony, every time that we watched them take a break, they would leave the courtroom, they would go back into a room for a break, for them to get refreshments, to take a break, to go to the restroom, things like that. But they weren't able to talk about the case under strict rules that they cannot deliberate or come to any decisions, cannot collaborate on any of the evidence until they are actually in the deliberation room. And they said that that was one of the most challenging parts of this, is to be, as they said, watching a show, unable to talk about what's going on. They talked about moments in the case where they felt like there was some really strong evidence presented that they wish that they had the ability to talk through and to understand based on, and have a discussion about. And they said that simply wasn't possible. They also talked about being very sure going into that deliberation room. They said that the prosecution put on what they called a very, very strong case. They said that they felt as if the prosecution laid out the charges against Daybell in a very direct way, in a very simple to understand way, and that it made it very, very easy, or simple rather, not easy, but simple rather, to come to that verdict, because they said it was very clear, black and white. They had rules to follow. So when they went into that deliberation room, they knew what they had to do. They knew what their job was, and they felt like the state had laid out everything very, very clearly. So as they went through that list, those rules that the judge had provided, they said it was very simple to say, is this true? Yes. If this is true, we must find him guilty. And that's exactly what they did. They said what they didn't expect was how much of an emotional toll it would take on them sitting in that courtroom and listening to the testimony and understanding and seeing the impact that these crimes had on the family members still alive and still sitting in that room listening to the testimony themselves. Listen in as they explain that impact.
By surprise is how much impact it had on me. There couldn't be a dry eye in the house when he talked, when all of Tammy's relatives talked, when Tylee's aunt talked. It all comes home with how many people and lives this affected. Of course, it took out 3 people that had their whole lives ahead of them, but in addition to that, all of their family and friends, it will affect forever.
I think that was definitely the hardest day, right? Yeah, Friday absolutely was by far the hardest day.
It was very emotionally draining, very, you just felt the emotions right there with them. You were feeling every single thing that they felt.
And I like to think that I was prepared for the testimony, if you will, the evidence. I wasn't ready for the emotional side of it, though I knew it was coming, but when it happened, you mentioned Colby, it hit home and it hit hard.
It hit home and it hit hard. They're talking there about both the testimony during the trial of family members as they talked and they shared their experiences. These jurors are also talking about the sentencing phase, because right after finding Daybell guilty, they took just an hour recess until they moved directly into the sentencing phase. 6 of the 8 charges against Chad Daybell were eligible for the death penalty. It means that the same jurors who had just determined that he was guilty of these crimes had to then go back into that deliberation room and determine whether or not the state had proven beyond a reasonable doubt that his crimes met the criteria to be eligible for the death penalty. They said just like the verdict, this was a very clear black and white instruction. They were to look at the evidence and determine whether or not the state had proven what we call in law aggravating factors. So aggravating factors are talking about whether or not he committed these crimes for financial gain. Did he commit the murders in order to gain financially himself or to allow someone else to gain financially? In this case, we're talking about he was found guilty of insurance fraud, meaning that he killed Tammy Daybell and then collected benefits. Tylee Ryan was murdered, and her benefits were collected. J.J. Vallow had benefits that were collected as a result of his death. And so that is something, or continue to be collected even after his death, which is illegal. And so the jury had already found him guilty of those. So then they had to go through and say, is that true? The state also put on evidence that this was especially heinous, that he showed an utter disregard for human life. So in that deliberation room, they have to weigh those aggravating factors. And the defense also has an opportunity to present what they call mitigating factors. Chad Daybell has a chance to talk for himself. He has an ability, he has the legal right to what they call allocution. And so he was able to speak on his own behalf, but he chose not to. He did not speak to the jury. He did not speak to the judge. And his attorney only offered just a few explanations of what was happening in his life. He did have the opportunity to present evidence, potentially from mental health experts, from somebody who might have been able to talk about what was going on and maybe how his mindset or how he got to this place in his life, in hopes of encouraging the jury to not determine that the death penalty was just. In this case, he did not offer much of that. And the jury said that that left them confused. They were actually surprised. One of the jurors told us, why didn't he plead for his life? She said that she was surprised that he didn't show any remorse. As jurors, they said they believed that he would have offered some mitigating factors, that he might have been able to provide some evidence that what he said during the trial, that what was presented during the case was true, and that Lori Vallow had manipulated him, and that potentially that he was going along with something that he didn't exactly understand, that he wasn't the mastermind. They expected to see something from his children, pleading for his life, pleading for the jury to not rule in favor of the death penalty, but instead they said that they simply did not see any of those mitigating factors being able to outweigh the aggravating factors presented by the state. Despite that, despite saying the decision was very straightforward, they said it was anything but easy.
That was probably the hardest part.
It was very difficult, but the way that the statute reads is if there's not enough mitigating factors to override the aggregating factors, you must find the death sentence, the death penalty that's what comes in. You don't have a choice, and there's one mitigating factor that, if you had enough empathy, but there weren't enough mitigating factors to override all 8 of those aggravating factors, and I think we all felt the same way on that.
Simply not enough mitigating factors to override the 8 aggravating factors that they presented. Some of the people, we talked earlier, we heard the jury talk about, these jurors talk about the emotional toll that it took on them, and they said that definitely was the most challenging part of this, listening to 11 victim impact statements. These statements were very straightforward. By law, they are under very strict guidelines, what they can and cannot say when they take the stand. They have to talk specifically about the impact on them as victims. They cannot bash the defendant. They can't speak about him. They can't even speak about the crime specifically. They have to limit their testimony and their statements to the jury to just simply the impact on them. So as you can imagine, for any of you who are listening in, we heard from Colby Ryan, the only surviving child of Lori Vallow, who said he is now alone. His mother imprisoned for life, his brother dead, his sister dead, his father also dead. His stepfather was killed by Alex Cox. So he spoke very eloquently, but also certainly emotional to hear him talk about being all alone. And you heard the jurors talk about listening to him and being very moved by those statements. Also, family members of Tammy Daybell took the stand. Aunt of Tylee Ryan talking about their relationship and just how much was lost with the death of these three people, and certainly saying that those stories and that testimony playing the biggest impact on them. We asked the jury about Chad's response. So if you were watching like we were, we watched for him to have any response. During this trial, we've seen very, very little. He has sat stoically. He does exchange conversation. He did exchange conversation with his defense attorney here and there. We saw a couple of smiles, a couple of laughs along the way. But for the most part, vast majority of this case, he has sat without much emotion, not showing any sort of reaction on his face or in his body language. And we saw the exact same thing during the verdict and during the sentencing as the clerk read all 8 guilty charges. And 2 days later, as that same clerk read that he was going to be sentenced to death, we saw very little emotion, very little, no reaction, none whatsoever, no facial expression that we could see, no body language. And the jurors told us that they were looking for that themselves, and this is what they thought that they saw.
Personally, I didn't have a problem looking at him, and I wanted to see his reaction. But to your point, he was stoic throughout. He didn't show much emotion. You mentioned he laughed a couple of times. You may have witnessed the only times that he did. He was stone-faced most of the time, but no, I did attempt to make an eye contact. And part of that was a conscious decision because I looked at some of the people in the gallery, the family, the grandfather. Then I knew I would have lost it as well.
Yes, it was hard to look at the gallery. That's what really got me, but Chad never even turned around once and acknowledged the jury. He stared at the judge the whole time. We never got a full face view of him ever during either sentencing.
That's who I was watching, was him, for any reaction, any remorse, just anything, and nothing. Absolutely nothing.
There was nothing, absolutely nothing, she said. And that is exactly how those jurors felt that he responded. No response, no remorse. And they said that was something that they were definitely looking for. There is a calm about them. They said that they are at peace with their decision, but that it does and will play an emotional role in their life. They said that this is something they will never forget. They will never unsee that testimony. They will never unhear the information presented to them. They will never unsee the evidence, those pictures of those bodies found on Daybell's property, of Tylee and JJ. They said that this is something that they will carry with them for all of their life. And they talked specifically about being somewhat of a family. They said they are now like an extended family. They will certainly watch out for each other. They will continue to consider themselves friends. And they said that they wouldn't be surprised that as appeals come up, as we potentially get to an execution date for Chad Daybell, that they expect that those will be times that some of that emotion comes back around and that they will likely stay connected to be able to take care of each other through those moments. What happens next? There is an automatic appeal for Chad Daybell. There is an automatic appeal that happens in every capital case. So in every death penalty case, there is an automatic appeal that will move forward. And then his attorney also has the opportunity to file additional appeals if he finds there's reason to warrant that. Then he certainly can do that. And we know there are still people on death row in Idaho that have been there for decades. They were sentenced decades ago and still remain on death row, and that's exactly where Chad Daybell is today. So he is in the Idaho Department of Correction. He is in prison. He will be housed with other death row inmates. Here in Idaho, death row inmates get 23 hours in their cell. They get 1 hour out of their cell. They are in what we would call solitary confinement, and that is how he will live for the remainder of his life until that execution date, barring any change or appeal in his case. Lori Vallow is of course, sentenced to life a year ago, sentenced to multiple life sentences that will run consecutively. So she will, in Idaho, will never be released, barring an appeal or barring a change in that conviction. Now, though, she is in Arizona, and she is facing charges in Charles Vallow. That's her fourth husband. She is facing charges in his death, and so we will continue to watch as that plays out. But for now, Chad Daybell sentenced guilty on all 8 charges and sentenced to die for the death of Tammy Daybell, J.J. Vallow, and Tylee Ryan. We're so happy that you've been with us and followed this case with us, along with us here on Inside the Courtroom. Until the next trial, which we will follow for you, take care.